Hello and welcome to TIFF Rewind, presented by Bell. Today we're going back to Best in Show from TIFF 2000. My name is Cameron Bailey, the Artistic Director and co-head here at TIFF. TIFF is located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. This territory is protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're grateful to work on this land, and we're committed to learn and share more of the stories of Indigenous people here. We encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on and its history. I want to thank everyone who makes today's event and everything we do at TIFF possible. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, and our major supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. I would also like to thank our members and donors for their continued support. This year, TIFF invites audiences to take a walk down memory lane as part of TIFF Rewind, presented by Bell. It's a free series of digital talks with filmmakers and actors who revisit past premieres at the festival. You can watch the talks with special guests on TIFF's social media channels or on TIFF's digital platforms during the festival. With a Crave subscription, Canadian audiences can stream the films on the Best of TIFF collection on Crave. Today, we're revisiting Best in Show, which premiered here at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 8th, 2000, and went on to become one of the most beloved comedies of all time. It's my great pleasure to introduce our special guests, the director and co-star of Best in Show, Christopher Guest, and his fellow co-stars, Catherine O'Hara and Eugene Levy. It's my great pleasure to introduce our special guest, the director and co-star of Best in Show, Christopher Guest, and his fellow stars, Catherine O'Hara and Eugene Levy. Welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thanks so much for being here and for joining us to look back at Best in Show from 22 years ago. Christopher, I want to start with you. This film came after Waiting for Guffman, and this is Spinal Tap, which you co-wrote and co-starred in. By then, how much was your method in terms of this kind of comedy and your regular cast of actors, how much were those in place, and how much did Best in Show actually do to perfect your approach?
I think that system was in place by then. Once we had done Spinal Tap and Waiting for Guffman, the actors were very well aware of what was going on and how to do that. Eugene and I had written Waiting for Guffman, so we knew how to lay out this next movie, even though it was a different subject, obviously. So I would say we pretty much knew how to go about that.
And Eugene, Catherine, there's such a fine line between kind of when you laugh at a character's behavior and when you find them ridiculous and you're laughing at them as people. But with Cookie and Jerry, I kind of felt like we grew to love them, even as oblivious as they are in some cases. How do you, with Christopher, find that line to walk so that we're not kind of making fun of them, but we're laughing at, what they do?
It's really good acting.
No doubt.
Catherine, what do you think on that?
I would say one thing I think that helps with that is right from the beginning, we talked about, I, for one, was intimidated at the idea of learning how to handle dogs. And we talked about how we had just gotten into this. In fact, in my head, I had a story of the dog had been given to us by a nice lady down the street that we had been nice to, and the dog we had, Winky, Brillo's is his real name, happened to be a sweet dog owned by this cute couple who were new to the game of handling dogs as well, to the dog show world. So I think that, along with the fact that we had such trouble coming up with some money for a good credit card, the sort of the story points that we came up with, I think, or that you guys came up with, that I helped with, I think. I think that, right away we felt for them. I felt for them, even with my sexual past, which I wish all my characters had. Thank you guys. Even with that, we were a loving couple and we were solid, and even with that kind of madness and running into these creepy guys who improvised some really scary memories. There was something I think inherently about these two, or pathetic, whatever, however you want to feel about them. Eugene, you think?
I still
Chris?
can't quite figure out what it was she saw in Jerry.
It's a little late, Eugene.
Well, in case for some reason there's a reshoot,
Yeah. Okay.
you want to redo a scene or alter. I've been thinking about it for 22 years.
Luckily, I found something about you.
I think it's just something that's inherent in the sensibility that certainly all three of us, share. Chris and I have always been in sync about trying to make all these storylines grounded, and trying to make these characters as human as possible. And that was the case, with Guffman. Certainly started with Spinal Tap, no question. But when we got involved with Guffman, that was really kind of the thing. You want to make the characters real. You want to make it funny, but not at the expense of the characters, the story, and the movie ultimately.
And I think if you don't like the people, the characters, then you've gone on to the wrong track. I think, as bizarre as some of the people are, you have to root for them, because then there wouldn't be anything else going on. I think, to Eugene's point, the idea that there is especially in his character, the idea that he said, I don't know how I would be attractive to Cookie. Well, yes, here's a person with bad teeth and 2 left feet, and that's not talking about his intelligence. So yes, you're not getting. It's not the gold standard of dating or marriage, but to that, Eugene is able, because of his talents, to pull that off, to make that seem as if that's almost normal. I think that's the key.
And Jerry accepts Cookie no matter what she throws at him, no matter how many ex-lovers she runs into. Somehow there's something really sweet about their marriage, and that he is completely accepting.
Yeah.
May I add, too, please? Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that improvising dialogue, which we did in these movies, when you're improvising dialogue, you are in no way outside of your character or commenting. For a lot of the time, for me, it was just surviving in the scene. You're trying to be there, trying to, help tell the story, get those story beats that you wrote, get those out. It's serving the story, serving the scene, and listening to everyone around you. So there is no time to be commenting on, oh, aren't I ridiculous, or aren't I funny, or aren't I sad? You've got a script to work with. We do a script to memorize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. That helps also, very much so, helps shape your character. In a movie that is, an improvised movie, or, the first time you're in a scene on the set with the actors, you're hearing the scene and the lines for the first time, and your character is helped shape very much by the spontaneity of what's going on in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about the kind of the skeleton of the film that existed on paper? You, Chris, and Eugene are credited as the screenwriters, but obviously a lot of it was improvised. So what do you start with, and then what's added by the actors?
It begins with an idea, hopefully. In this case, it seemed initially a rather odd subject, but I had taken my dog for a walk, and I had a mutt, essentially, and I ran into a woman who had a purebred dog, and there was an interesting conversation, at least for her. where she said, it was kind of chilling. She said, pointing to my dog, "What's that?" And well, he's half this and half that, or whatever. And she made a face as if it was horrific for her to be near a dog that may not have been a purebred dog. And I began to think about the metaphor of that was kind of deep. And then I had been following these dog shows sort of as a joke to watch them. And Eugene and I started talking about this idea, and it was a long time in developing in terms of us going to some dog shows, being around some of these people, eventually understanding how seriously they took this. Each breed they're the best breed to that person. That there is no other breed. Everything else is horrible. I mean, it's unspeakable that you could have anything other than what they would have. And then Eugene and I laid out on cards the story, the first, second, and third acts. We knew, I think, pretty much who we wanted to be in the film, the main people, right, Eugene? I think.
Yes.
And then we filled in some parts along the way. But it's a very rigidly done situation with all the films in terms of this isn't just sort of a random thing of people yapping away. And then what happens in every scene also. And so everyone is grounded in knowing who they are, the characters. Mm-hmm. And that's the way we proceeded.
But isn't it funny? And I know I've mentioned this before, but when this idea first came up, and I remember saying, "What? Okay, so we're building to a dog show like we built to the Red, White, and Blaine in Waiting for Guffman. But how is that going to be funny? How is a dog show going to be funny? Because it's got to be straight. It's got to be real. You can't make it a funny dog show."
Right.
And that was kind of an interesting. That was an interesting scenario. And then that kind of dropped. Then we dropped the idea for a bit. Mm-hmm. And then sometime later, you said, "What about that dog show idea?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "There's still the same problem. Thinking. And then you said, "What if Fred Willard is the color commentator in the broadcast?" And that was like a giant lightning strike. Yeah. So you can keep your show as straight as you want to keep it. And, Fred, great Fred Willard will, provide the laughs. And that was really terrific. And and it was really a wonderful, not only working with the dogs, which was an incredible experience. We did learn a lot about, showing dogs, but it was an incredibly fun shoot as well.
I think another point which I made after Fred died in the last year, it occurred to me, Eugene and I would sit in the office and look up at these cards, and there were maybe 120 cards, and realized that Fred's importance, it was so vital to have him at various points, because you could see in Guffman this kind of serpentine reaction that the audience had when he was in a scene, where he and Catherine got to do a scene in that, a husband and wife, and then you needed him to come back for what he did and only he could do. And it's an interesting idea, because I don't think other movies in Spartacus, they're not saying, well, we need the Tony Curtis character every 10 minutes, because otherwise they're going to leave. I think this was unique to this, to him and to this process, I think. And I remembered us sitting there looking at each other thinking, because they had we'd color coded these cards. It's a testament to his gift, obviously.
Mm-hmm. And Jim Pittock, in Best in Show, Jim Pittock maintained the reality of the show and let Fred go nuts, and never lost the reality of being that real competent show.
Yes.
Right?
And that stabilizes that relationship. You need the real believable person next to Fred, and that in some ways is the hardest thing, because a person who is on their own a funny person needs to basically take a back seat to what, in this case, Fred Willard is always
Mhm.
doing.
But it's the art of the straight man, because it is a backseat, but it isn't, and there's no scene without it, really, without him doing that. It's the real, it's like the perfect embodiment, I think, of straight man. The same with I'd say Ed Begley Jr. God bless him. When we went to the counter and we couldn't come up with a credit card, he acted, and he's improvising as if he had studied hospitality for years and knew exactly how to make us feel wonderful and welcome and didn't embarrass us. Lesser comedians would have been doing bits on us, wouldn't they?
Yep.
Right.
Oh.
I want to ask a little bit more about how you work together. Catherine, you and Eugene had been scene partners going back to SCTV and, of course, all the way through Schitt's Creek. By the time you were doing Best in Show, how are you reading each other in those same kinds of moments? What are you kind of giving and taking from each other as you're doing those scenes? And what had you learned by the time you got to Best in Show from the years you'd worked previously?
Well, I think Best in Show was kind of the first major thing we had done together as a couple, right? Where our scenes were all together. I mean, we did a lot of work on SCTV. And you know, some together, Bobby and Lola, you know.
I was thinking Bobby Bittman and Lola Heatherton.
And Lola Heatherton, the scenes we did together were, you know, there was great chemistry, and we knew how to, you know, time everything off each other. Basically, that was pretty easy and fun. But Best in Show was the first time we worked together. Guffman, we didn't necessarily work together. It was Catherine and Fred. So that was really kind of the and here's the thing about Catherine and I mean, this goes back to SCTV and Second City, is we both basically have the same kind of working style. Even though our lives have been in comedy, I don't consider myself a comedian by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think Catherine sees herself as a comedian. We don't necessarily look at life the way stand-up, you know, comedians do. We don't look at everything through a comic prism necessarily, but the idea of being a character, getting laughs through somebody that we have to play or that we create, is a great way to get laughs that we couldn't necessarily get, you know, on our own. Not to say that we don't from time to time get a good laugh. A Mighty Wind that followed Best in Show was, it was great that we had Best in Show just before we did A Mighty Wind, because that working together on Best in Show really, again, helped solidify how easy it was to work together on A Mighty Wind, because our process is pretty much the same. We approach everything as actors in a way, and are able to give it a, you know, a comic lilt over and above what we bring to the character in that kind of approach. So anything else to add to that, Catherine?
I think we trust each other too, and you know, we learned that at Second City, especially when you're improvising. You know, if I think all these people that were in these movies with you gentlemen are good writers as well. The best improvisers are also good writers, I think, and we have a sense of the scene, what needs to be done, and a sense of where it fits in the story, and we listen to each other, which is so lovely, because you get so much from each other, and you give each other so much about your own character. You know, people feed you ideas, and if you improvise in your yes and, then you go with it, and it's just the greatest gift to have all these wonderful, smart, funny people around you. And you know, you trust each other to the point where Eugene and I didn't even discuss how we would look at all in in Best in Show. And the first time I saw Jerry the first time we saw each other, I was still getting my hair done, I guess, and Eugene came in. With his look, we look at each other like, okay, that's who I'm married to. Okay, all right, that's who I'm married to. You just go with it. It's the best thing, to be with people you trust. I like to think Eugene.
I think trust is everyone has to have trust when you're working with someone in a scene. I was thinking of, there was a moment when we were writing A Mighty Wind, and Eugene's character, I mean, it makes his character in Best in Show look like Einstein. I mean, this person was so deeply damaged, and it was the bravest choice of any movie I ever, because this person who is barely able to talk at this point, and you have to trust that implicitly, and all the people around you in the scene, you have to go with that. I mean, that was extraordinary, and it is all about trust, whatever it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's some kind of test to me too. Like, okay, if I'm like this, could you love me? How about if I do this? Could you still love me?
Yeah.
The last thing I want to ask is just what your memories are of bringing the film to the Toronto Film Festival. It premiered on September 8th, 2002. It was a long time ago. But with a comedy especially, I imagine you really want to see how the movie plays with that audience at the festival. What do you remember about premiering it 22 years ago here in Toronto?
I think it was this amazing weekend that we were there for a couple of days at least, and it was, the response in my memory was tremendous. It was just uplifting, everything that Eugene and I wanted it to be. I believe it was we were embraced. I believe it became our favorite festival to go to. It just felt it was an amazing time.
And and Waiting for Guffman as well. That was just a couple of years before that. I remember that was like the first major screening we had on Waiting for Guffman. We used to show that film in the Castle Rock offices, like show various cuts to maybe 8 or 10 office workers coming in, just to run it past them, and they were usually kind of quiet screenings, if I remember. And we would leave and kind of scratch our heads, going, I still think it's funny. I still think it's funny. And when it ran at TIFF, I believe at the Uptown 2 at the time, the laughter just started cascading in the very first scene with the city council members, like huge laughs, and that was an amazing experience. I remember looking at you. You were sitting in the row ahead of me, and it was like, this is something.
Yeah.
And Best in Show kind of also was equally as thrilling in terms of a screening.
I think that was in the big theater, wasn't it? That was in.
Yeah, that might have been the Elgin, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not sure. You would know better than me. I wasn't there, unfortunately.
Oh, you were probably 4.
No. I was a full-on grown-up, but I just wasn't there that night, unfortunately. Catherine, what do you remember from bringing Best in Show to Toronto?
Well, like Chris said, it's his favorite festival. I have been watching movies all day long and sneaking into parties since year 1 of Toronto Film Festival. So the idea to actually be in a movie and have a right to be at the party, actually get invited, is just too thrilling. Like Chris said, it was such a fun weekend. It's really exciting festival, and Toronto is so, with it, so supportive of it, and the whole city comes alive during the festival. It's just a great time of year. It's really exciting. It's exciting and lovely, and be in such a fun movie that I was grateful just to be in, and then to get to present it there at the festival was lovely.
And it was also an anticipated movie after Waiting for Guffman. We took Guffman there, and there was some kind of resonance from This Is Spinal Tap.
Right.
But that's about all there was when that came to TIFF. And because of the great screening that we had at TIFF with Guffman, Best in Show was kind of an anticipated movie that people were truly looking forward to, and I remember that feeling as well. That going to the festival with a movie where there's already some buzz about,
Yeah. Everybody wanted to see it.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you for taking this little trip down memory lane with us. I really appreciated it. It's always great to see you here in Toronto. And thank you for this film and all the films you've made over the years. Catherine O'Hara, Eugene Levy, Christopher Guest, thank you. And if you're in Canada, why not go check out Best in Show again? And remember the nut dialogue, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, naming nuts. It is on Crave. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.